There we go. It should be working now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Council Matters. That's what we named this. Sorry. I am the Primogen, Chris. Happy to see you all here. This is a new formula that we're trying out, and I asked all of you guys a while back what your thoughts are on V5, what you like about it, what you'd like to see improved with it, and what you're not super happy about. There is obviously no revised edition of 5th edition on its way, I think, but it's fun to imagine what could be, you know. So I've got all these answers gathered up. We're gonna talk a little bit about some of them, but before I do that, I'd like to introduce the co-host for this episode. Yes, you're over there. So take it away, Zombie.
Hi, I am LLADonZombie. I have a YouTube channel, which is
Oh, you got muted now. There we go. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah.
Am I better? I do a series on my YouTube channel called 3 Dots and Resources, where I talk about like tools and resources for storytellers and players and how to run better Vampire the Masquerade games. And I also play video games on Twitch, but nobody cares about that.
No, I think people care. And
I'm just joking.
I've got your information in the description of the video, and also you're using the same username everywhere. So, well, for you people looking, it's the LLADonZombie, right?
Yeah, I'm very well branded.
Perfect. Thank you. So, I was basically we started talking about V5 because I know that for a fact that you are a huge fan of the rules and V5 as well. And I don't mind. I like V5. So this is not going to be like a me versus you, although we will, of course, be talking about how things have been and how things are and how they could be. And we got a few talking points up. So let me get the first one up. Also, by the way, we will be covering a lot about older editions in the game. I never played much V20, but I played a lot of revised edition or 3rd edition, I guess you'd call it. The difference aren't that huge. There's some refinement with V20 that I think was very welcome, but in general, they're pretty similar. But one of the things that people seem to have a lot of opinions about is the combat system of V5, which has been pretty changed from earlier editions. It used to be, of course, that initiative was something you rolled, and then you kind of declared your actions in the order of lowest to highest. So the person with the lowest initiative started out saying, this is what I'm going to do, and then you kind of worked your way up, and then you worked your way backwards. So the person with the highest initiative was able to kind of predict, in a sense, what the other person was going to do. I'll be honest, I've only ever tried once to play with this system because I found it a little bit convoluted, and I read around on on Reddit, and a lot of people were like, we just declare what we're doing, and then we go with it. But it's very different in V5, right? Like, how does initiative work in V5?
So the default way that they suggest doing it is, as I understand it, though, like you said, most people just do what they want, is the game suggests doing like the pairs of people who are fighting each other act first at the same time, pretty much. Like, so if you're grappling with someone, you grapple them, and then they're rolling to.
Ooh.
Sorry,
no worries.
They're rolling to react to the grapple, and then the winner takes damage. And then ranged people would deck next, and then people who are doing anything else would deck next. In my experience, people just kind of go with who I declare what I'm doing, and then they just roll with it.
Yeah.
They do have an initiative system in the optional rules, though, where you do like roll an initiative, kind of Dungeons and Dragons-esque. I've yet to see anyone do that in any live plays or my own games.
Yeah. I think this approach to initiative that's kind of more loosey-goosey is pretty similar to how I've seen in other games. Like, I played some Wrath and Glory, and in Wrath and Glory, it's just player, storyteller, or game master in that case. Like, you just take turns.
That's a good way.
It's really good because they've also implemented a system of stealing initiative. Like, both the game master can seize the initiative, as can the players, by expending certain points. But I feel like that's a very balanced way to doing it. I think most people can agree that the old initiative system as written was a little bit clunky in Vampire.
It
But
sounds cool in theory, you know.
it is, and it's explicitly said to be like, yeah, if you're good enough at combat, you can kind of see what other people are going to do, and you can respond to that before they do it. Celerity also kind of plays into it, like you can do multiple actions in the same turn. But for someone like me who didn't do much rolling back in the days, I'm pretty comfortable with V5's initiative. But we are getting a lot of comments about combat system being too simple, right? And I know for a fact that in the old system you had a whole bunch of maneuvers, like easily 15, if not more. And there were everything from kicking to biting to grappling to clinching to throwing things. And you also had 3 different ways of avoiding damage: blocking, you had dodging, you had parrying. How has that changed in V5?
So there are maneuvers in V5, but they're more of like what do they actually call them? They call them additional conflict options. Like there's advancing, maneuvering. Like advancing is like moving toward your goal.
Yeah.
So like if in a combat encounter, that might be while the combat's happening, someone's hacking on the computer and trying to like maybe doing like an extended test to like access the systems and open the door so the party can move through. There's like maneuvering, which is like flanking, or I like the all out attack and all out defense options where the attacker gets like a +1 damage bonus, but then they don't get to defend against attacks.
Right.
You know, but there's only like I think 5, 5 or 6 of them, and they're really just more to change the number of in the dice pools.
Yeah, I remember just combat itself has its own different maneuvers, but then I think Revised and V20 also had maneuvers for, or at least example roles for how to do social combat, social interaction. Did that carry over to V5 as well? I'm really not familiar, so that's
it did.
Yeah.
Everything in physical combat. They don't even call it combat in the book. If you read like the language, they use conflict,
right.
And then in the examples of the maneuvers, they use examples like maneuvering in a social situation might be like positioning yourself like as the prince's favorite, or
so they,
instead of flanking, maybe appealing to the prince's sentiments, but yeah, everything I like that about V5. So I do a lot of before I found V5 and fell in love with it, I do a lot of like I don't want to say like off-brand. It's not really indie, but like the wide space of RPGs. I read way more games than I ever play, and that's one of my things that I consider like a litmus test for if I want to run a game is if social combat is at play, and if skill checks are the same as combat. I don't like those to be separate, like in Dungeons and Dragons. It feels like you have a whole book of rules for combat, and then you just have a footnote for how to.
I think Dungeons and Dragons' strength is in its combat simulation. Like it started there, and that's its core strength. I think if you want to have a rule system for complex social interaction, then I think maybe you want to either hack the system or go with something like Vampire, which is more designed around skills, like you said.
Yeah. It's like one of those things though, when like all the tools you have are hammers, you just want to hit everything with hammers.
Yeah. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that. Like
there is no shame.
If people have been following me on Twitter, I went off on Dungeons and Dragons, but I like it.
I love Dungeons and Dragons.
I run my own game in it.
I haven't played it since 3rd edition, but it'll always have a special place.
I know 4th edition got 4th edition was a little bit more blatant with roles for characters. It got a lot of kickback, so 5th edition is more similar to 3rd edition, I'd say. In the
I've heard only good stuff about it.
Yeah, 5th edition is good. It's fine. Although my friend who is much more into combat rules and rule clarity than me says that 4th edition was the best at explaining rules. So, to each their own. But something that I saw, which raised some of my eyebrow a little bit, was the fact that apparently gun wounds or firearms now actually cause the same kind of damage that, for example, Supernatural Claws and Sunlight does. Is that a thing in V5? Is that how it works?
I I'm I
Lethal?
believe it still does superficial damage unless it's like something like a
Yeah.
dragon fire
Yeah,
route,
so
you know what I mean, or
someone was
something.
saying that in they should bring back lethal damage because now guns are more dangerous to vampires. I don't know. I always were on the assumption that bullets don't do much to vampires. Like in Revised, they were not lethal. They were the other word for crap. I'm forgetting.
Like a
Basically,
piercing or something.
yeah. So it's superficial. Okay, well then,
Mm.
everyone fixed that one. So it's superficial damage. Perfect.
Oh yeah, that's the word you were looking
Yeah, superficial. The ones that you said. It was bashing in the previous edition. So it's half damage. Perfect. Then I should have probably read that up before I included it in the list of talking points. But that's good though. Guns, by their very nature, are supposed to pierce your organs and veins and stuff like that. Vampires don't need those. So
it from my experience, it does add up really fast. Like
that's
because
just true.
health pools are
Yeah.
typically so low because everyone
Mm-hmm.
wants social
Yeah,
skills.
yeah, yeah.
Unless
That's
you're
true.
going for like a fortitude build on your kindred,
Mm-hmm.
like that those bullet wounds add up
Yeah.
real quick.
I
And
think, yeah, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I think vampires are in general a bit more squishy in 5th edition. Because
That
health,
wouldn't
yeah,
surprise me.
yeah, because soaking played a big role in previous editions, and you also, I think armor rules. Someone was criticizing the armor rules of V5 of being kind of lackluster, as well as for preventing damage. But it was also, I think you also added damage depending on how many successes you rolled in Revised Edition and earlier. Is that the same in V5? Like, is there a set amount of damage you do, or does it actually increase with how well you roll?
So it's in the additional rules section.
Mm-hmm.
There is a table for example weapons where, if I remember, oh, here it is. Like a light piercing does
Mm-hmm.
+2 before the halving.
Okay.
So like let's say you roll and you get a 5, and the guy who's on the other side of the conflict gets a 2, you would get 3, and then plus your 2 for the weapon,
Yeah.
and then you would have for the superficial.
Yeah.
So I mean that can add up fast, but that is in the like additional rules section, so that it's not necessary. If you just wanted to just abstract all your weapons into straight firearms rolls, no one's gonna come.
Yeah, we're getting some feedback. We're getting some feedback from the chat that you still soak because it's a contested roll, and you don't if you don't focus stamina, it stacks fast and damage. And yeah, that makes sense. You used to use stamina as well for soaking in previous editions. I think everyone had the same amount of health levels in the previous editions, but you used your stamina to soak damage, which I think is a big change in the way that damage is treated. Because now you have health levels based on your stamina and your, what's the other stat for it? Or is it just stamina +2, right?
Stamina +3.
Yeah, +3. Sorry. So yeah, and by their very nature, you will be squishier if you have lower stamina. Like in previous editions, you still had the same different tiers of damage, but you were not as good at soaking. So that's a huge change to the rules. Which I think, like when I did, I ran the sacrifice, and I had a Ventru and a Lasombra fighting. Like I had Malankov. Do you know the sacrifice?
From Chicago by Night.
Yeah, exactly. And Malankov has potence, I think. Yeah, he does. And the character fighting him was a Ventru with the Fortitude. So they were just bashing each other back and forth. Like neither of them were actually doing much damage. So it was a pretty interesting fight.
Can do a lot.
Yeah. But it's Fortitude used to be just as, you get extra soaking. That was the only thing you did with Fortitude. Now it's much more varied, which I like.
I think in the first level of Fortitude, you can get extra health points, if I remember.
Yeah, that's
then
correct.
The second level, you can get like more damage absorption. So if you just take 2 points in Fortitude, like you can get a lot of staying power in a fight.
Yeah, that was the player.
A lot of tanking,
Yeah, he was he was a Ventru, and I think he had 4 dots in stamina as well. So yeah, he was a monster basically. But it was interesting, and I think I like fast-paced combat more. But I can definitely see how if you wanna if you wanna make a fighty character, I can imagine that your options are a little bit narrowed down now in this edition. Um,
And
yeah,
fortitude isn't glamorous, you know. So I
yeah,
haven't
yeah,
seen a lot of people do stamina fortitude builds on their kindred.
yeah.
I say builds, you know,
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
you know,
Yeah,
you shouldn't play that. Or maybe if you want to play that way, play that way.
yeah.
But you know, but you know, I haven't seen a lot of people do it because there's not a lot of like cool, like I'm acting on you powers and fortitude.
Hmm.
And you know, most people typically dump, you know, their points into dexterity and strength
Oh
just
yeah.
because those are
I think
cooler.
yeah, dexterity. I think dexterity. I kind of get a feeling that has boosted even more in importance in V5 than it used to be in previous editions. I may be wrong, but I kind of got
Oh
that
yeah,
feeling.
that dex athletic rolls are probably like one of the
Yeah,
most common
yeah,
rolls.
yeah,
That and wits awareness,
yeah.
you
Wits
know.
awareness. Yeah, that's oh man, most common role in the game. But yeah, there's ghouls were also being brought up as being kind of lackluster in this edition. Like they don't do they still have access to potence? Because I know that was like a given. If you were a ghoul, you got a dot in potence right away, and then you could develop more disciplines later on.
No, they just get one dot in you there whoever's feeding them
Yeah.
their highest discipline.
Oh, all right.
So like I have a ghoul in
Mm-hmm.
the Chicago by Night game that I'm
Yeah.
playing, and he my highest discipline is potent, so he gets like the
Oh,
lethal hands, I think, you know,
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
But they're pretty powerful. I don't know how strong they were in previous editions.
They they were mortal wise, but they also had Kindred Vitae. So for every point of
Yeah.
Kindred Vitae they had, they could soak or heal damage and stuff like that. But once they were out of that amount of blood, they couldn't use their own blood like a vampire could. They could only use vampiric blood, as far as I recall. I'm not
Yeah.
an expert on it. I'm sure chat will correct me.
Like my goal in my game, I use the gifted mortal rules because I spent a lot of points to get that ghoul.
Yeah,
And he's got like an 8 in firearms. Like
that's
no
a
one
lot.
else in the coterie has
Yeah,
an 8 on any roll, and he's the ghoul driver. Yes, like 8
that
in
is
firearms.
insanely high. 8 dice, and yeah, I think these days these higher dice pools really matter a lot more in V5 than they would have done in earlier editions. Because something we should maybe cover as well is how difficulty works in the different editions. Because
Oh
in
yeah, sure.
yeah, because in previous editions, the base the base difficulty was 6. You were rolling against 6, and that is the same in V5 as far as I know. Although you use these special dice now, and a 10 would not explode in the previous editions. But there were some different rules here. Like if you had a specialty, you would get an extra die, or your 10s would explode. It's a little bit here and there. But the important part was that the difficulty was not actually how many successes you rolled. The difficulty was what you needed to beat to get a success, which I think partly carried over to Chronicles of Darkness, which uses 8s as success. The system in
That
between.
sounds hard.
Yeah, everything is super hard in Chronicles of Darkness, but you get explosive 10s, so that's an advantage. But
Mm.
basically, that meant that your amount of successes instead determined how well you performed. So if you were painting something, if you were painting a portrait, for example, and it had to be very lifelike, maybe the difficulty level would be 8. And if you rolled 5 successes of that, it would be a masterpiece. So that was how the old system worked with skill rolls. And the
I kind
system
of like
does,
that.
yeah,
That's kind of nice.
I like that. I actually would say I prefer that system, although it does get more complicated for the storyteller because the storyteller has to kind of always compare to this chart, be like, all right, how difficult is this role going to be? Like the storyteller had to go, okay, it's going to be this difficulty. These days, it's less amounts of difficulties to play with, I guess. Still, kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you storytell V5 with difficulties?
Uh, I mean, really more just. I mean, they have the chart in the book, which is like kind of toward the back, where it's like examples
Mm-hmm.
of you know, like oh, maybe a three successes in your strength check would be like lifting a car, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But from the most part, you know, most people I've seen and in our own games, we, you know, like it's either an arbitrarily picked number or competing against another dice pool.
Yeah.
You know, where 1 to 2 being something that a mortal could do, 3 being something maybe on the superior end of mortal, you know, ability,
Yeah.
and then 4 and 5 being getting into like the supernatural ability.
Yeah.
But the, I mean, some mortals in just the example section of the rulebook could get higher than
Oh yeah,
that.
I was playing Blood City on the Onyx Path with David Tueres running the game, and I was like, when he was rolling for the mortals we were fighting, I was like, they have like double my dice pool in everything. So it's I think that was probably the first time I was like, this system is different. was my response to that. Dice pools used to be a lot smaller for NPCs, I think.
I'm not sure about that, but I know from experience, in my current game, I joined late, and I was like a later joined player. They told me a story that all of them were like Tremere, and none of them focused on combat or strength.
Yeah.
And that they had tried to like apprehend like a 16-year-old who had like beaten them up, you know, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
a
yeah.
group of vampires being beaten up by a 16.
That was oh man, yeah, I have so many stories about that. And I think that kind of plays into one of the things that I think is probably the most overlooked rule in V5 that I noticed a while back, or I was actually told about it. Pardon me. A lot of times, because to preface, V5 uses the hunger die, right? The hunger dice. And V5 has its own special die system. There is a conversion chart for that in the book, which everyone should bookmark because it's a bit pricey buying the V5 dice. But basically, it used to be that you botched if you roll a 1. That took away one of your successes. I think it was the same in V20 as well. So if you roll a 1, that was actually -1 success. They kind of transferred the spirit of this into the blood dice. Like if you roll a 1 on a blood die, that would be a bestial failure. Like that would be a skull, right? I think so. If you got no successes and you got one of those bestial failures, well, it would be a bestial failure. And if you got one, if you critted, if you rolled 10 on the blood die, and this is in V5, you'd get a messy crit. And 10s in previous editions also had an effect if you had specialty, for example. But a lot of people go like, all right, so I can get a messy crit or a bestial failure if I'm trying to open a door. Yes, technically. But there is a rule that says if you can have your dice pool and still hit the amount of successes needed to do a thing, the storyteller can just say, you do the thing. And that's a rule that should be used a lot in this kind of game because they also say that you should be rolling for things that can have a dramatic impact. I wouldn't say that opening a door in it of itself would have a dramatic impact on the story, but if that door was being blocked by people and you were blocking hunters from entering, that's a different story. But have you had any fun experiences with blood dye? Like, how was your perspective on the use of blood dye?
I've only had one bestial failure in the Chicago by Night game I'm playing as a player. Unfortunately, that was against another player. We were in a car with a book possessed by a wraith that was influencing him, kind of like a golem kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like my precious. I was trying to take him to a Giovanni clan vampire to get guidance. And then he decided he was going to take the book, and then I bestially failed and then rolled the dominate compulsion, where like you have to make someone do what you want or you continue to take penalties. So now me and him were between a rock and a hard place.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
That's compelled by the book, and I was being compelled by my beast, and it ended in a car crash and him being like crushed and almost going into torpor.
That is that is, I mean, that gives your storyteller and you something to play off of. I remember I've had a few occasions where I've had a compulsion happen, and it's been difficult to integrate that into how I'm playing. But I think they
Yeah.
exist there to make to remind you both of the fact that you have the beast, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a talk a bit more about in a second, but also to prevent these scenarios like when you're under pressure, that's when the beast pops out, especially if you're hungry. But
Yeah,
we're also
it's kind of
yeah.
like a overt caricature of real emotions. Because who hasn't known somebody who just when they get
Yeah.
mad had to have their way?
Yeah,
You
exactly,
know?
exactly. I am a little bit upset that the clan compulsions are only one on a D10 or a 10, I guess. But
Yeah, rare.
that's house rulable too as well. Uh, but I was gonna say, the blood die are like you always have one, unless you've killed someone. Unless you've drained someone, you will always have at least
True.
one blood die. And I've never like when I ran games in older editions and when I played in games in older editions, the blood pool was always very abstract to me. It felt like I'm not going to say it felt like a power pool, of course, but it felt more like, let's get hunger dealt with. If I'm low on hunger, I'm going to have a more difficult time resisting frenzy. But it never really felt itself reminded. Like you could easily keep your blood topped off if you had herd or if you went out, had a successful hunt. But I feel like the blood die are really well integrated into the system to constantly remind you that there is the small chance that you're gonna flip the fuck out because the beast is just gonna take control over you. And I think LA by Night really illustrates that well with Jason Carl being the voice in the back of your head, going trying to tempt you to do stuff.
That's a clever way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I'm getting some comments from the chat as well. Like it was more like a mana bar, and I think before we go on to the next point, sorry, I'm taking I'm dominating here. I'll let you talk more.
No, you're okay.
Thank you, but I think V5 focuses a lot more on the gothic horror, personal horror part because I do feel like there was a little bit of a power creep in earlier editions. Didn't have to be, but I feel like a lot of the game got more and more geared towards being like kind of cool people, superhero, anti-heroes doing like protecting stuff. And V5 is like, you're not a good person. You're a monster. You're gonna fuck up eventually. I'll be here catching you when you do. Not everyone likes that, of course, but that's fine. Also, Nerdbird is pointing out that Karim actually changed the rules. If you get a messy crit, it doesn't have to be messy. It can also be that you get a compulsion depending on the situation where it happens. And I think Outstar and Karim were discussing that, and it got put into play during the Vain Pursuit actual play, if I'm not mistaken.
Did that get released in an addendum or anything? Do you know?
I don't. He said it live on the stream, and he hasn't gone against it later. I don't know if it's been written down. Yeah, I mean, he is the lead developer of V5,
I know.
so his word is law. But I think that makes more sense. It gives more playground for you to work with.
They also, on the topic of the compulsions and the bestial, I noticed last night when I was going back over some of the rules that they suggest that if your table it doesn't want to do compulsions, like maybe you're more of a theater-based table and people would rather role play their own vices, that a thing that you could do to replace that with the bestial dice is to do things like maybe taking a stain instead of like a compulsion, like maybe whatever you did was more vicious than what I mean, than what it is, or taking damage to like your backgrounds.
Oh yeah, or
like your
or damage to backgrounds. Yeah.
Like maybe you've wrecked your car and now you have a 1 dot temporary damage to your resource.
Or you went overboard with your contact and they don't want to talk with you anymore. Like you did something that cut the. Yeah, I think that's a really good way.
I see that as something that could be used like interchangeably if a compulsion isn't appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I feel we're going into backgrounds in a little bit, but I feel like the backgrounds were always very nebulous, in my opinion, in previous editions, because it was like, yeah, you can earn more background points or lose them through play, and they must have released a book to give you more information about this because there's over 100 books. But I always felt like, how do I as a player know if I'm going to make more background dots or not? It was never really described in the core rule books. Maybe in V20, I haven't read it because the entire book because it's huge. But I like the idea of giving damage to backgrounds. I think that that's a good alternative. Just give us more to play with, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. But let's go on.
Speaking of Vain Pursuit, you know, that in the first episode, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but he pretty much like wiped out like half their background dots.
Oh God,
like,
yeah, that was painful. That was painful.
I
was like, Kareem, you are cruel. You're a cruel taskmaster.
He was like, I spent background dots on that.
Yeah, that was just like, oh well, guess you put him in the wrong thing. Like, if it. That was cruel.
I felt bad.
Yeah, I felt bad for them as well. I think everyone, they must have had like a session 0 before. They're like, yeah, this is shit's gonna happen to you guys, so don't get too attached to what you have. But man, that was cruel. But I think one other big change, which I personally have been very on the fence about, because I actually like the older editions better, is the change from nature, demeanor, and virtues to tenets, convictions, and predator type. Roughly, that's obviously not a complete crossover, but they kind of represent the same things. Are you familiar with how the nature demeanor system used to work and the virtues?
I know some about it. Like I know like the Sabbat could take paths and do things different than humanity.
Yeah. Exactly. So essentially, you had your nature demeanor, and they were primarily tools to help you play your character. I looked at the lists on the White Wolf Wikia right now, and there's close to 100 different nature demeanors you could pick from all the different editions of books. But basically, they were like, oh, architect, that's your nature. You want to construct something. You want to build something. That's your character's driving goal. So every time you move, you role play towards that, the storyteller could be like, oh yeah, you get 1 point of willpower back as a reward for acting on your character's nature. And same with demeanor. Demeanor was the way you presented yourself to others, and nature was the way you were when the cards were on the table. Like that was your true self, which I always liked because it kind of really presented vampires as these two-faced creatures. They used it in all the games of previous editions, but they replaced that. I guess you could say that your tenets and convictions kind of sort of relate to that, and your predator type, like all these things get together to define who you are, right? Because that's the closest you get to advice for role playing on your sheet. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, so like convictions are kind of like get out of jail free cards for your like the what are they called, the tenets. Yeah. So like if you would get a stain, you could use your conviction to say, well, this is kind of who I am.
Yeah. And your tenets were the rules that the group agrees to follow, and conviction is what your character believes. Right?
And for a Sabbat type game, if you wanted to try to do that in V5, you could always just make your tenets things that are more Cainite oriented.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You could like your tenets and your convictions don't have to be nice. You could be like, there's even examples in the book about that. There should be more examples, but there are. It's stuff like don't snitch. I don't think that's morally very like don't eye for an eye could definitely be a conviction or a tenet. Like if someone harms you, you harm them back. Never let a mortal step over you. Like there's ways that you could create a moral code with your tenets and your convictions that reflects Sabbat. But you have humanity. You don't have an alternative to humanity though in V5. So that's really where it's doesn't really work with Sabbat anymore. Or am I wrong?
I play a La Sombra on Chicago by Night. And even with getting extra stains from having, the disciplines, and even with getting stains from just being a questionably good person, I haven't been able to get below, I started at 6. I haven't even gotten to 5.
Yeah, it's
You know what I mean?
yeah, it's
So
surprisingly difficult to lose humanity in V5.
yeah,
I've found.
it's tough to get below 5.
Yeah,
So I don't feel like it would be too hard. Yeah, I don't feel like it would be too hard to play a Sabat character,
yeah,
even with humanity.
yeah.
You
But
know,
but in my opinion, I don't think they should have called it humanity. If that's the case, because I think that's the crutch. I think the people, myself included, have always correlated humanity to human values. Like they have a table for humanity in older editions. Like at 7, you are not comfortable with stealing. Stealing will have you roll on your humanity. Humanity 6, you don't mind stealing. You're okay with stealing from people. Humanity 5, you're okay with beating people up. So there was a very like a hierarchy of sins for the old ways.
there's also a complaint I've heard. I feel like it's decently legitimate
Mm-hmm.
that the way that they worded humanity is really confusing just as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because
In V5, you mean?
if you in V5, because
Yeah.
if you succeed in your humanity role, then you feel bad about it and you don't
Mm-hmm.
lose humanity. But if you don't succeed, then you lose humanity.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of, if you think about it, as like setting a new normal,
Yeah.
with, you know, a term that's used a lot nowadays, you know, like then it makes sense. But they worded it kind of confusing, and I think it's confused a lot of people.
I think. Oh, sorry.
No, I was done. I was
No,
done.
I think the main focus of V5 is, of course, to play younger vampires, and also, obviously, from how the book was released, you're playing vampires who are still clinging to their humanity. In older editions, as well as the new edition, then if you succeed in your role, you feel bad, and that's a carryover from previous editions because you would roll your conscience. So you had 3 virtues. You had conscience or conviction. If this is where we're getting into the roads, you had self-control or instinct, and you had courage. These were your 3 virtues. So anyone who was following the path of humanity, which was the baseline for basically anyone who was turned into a vampire. Humans don't follow the path of humanity because they don't have a beast that can mess them up, but basically humanity is human values. So you had conscience, you had self-control, and you had courage. Conscience and self-control together, you had 1 dot in all 3 of these, and then you got to put out 7 more dots. Your humanity was your conscience and conscience and self-control put together, usually 6 or 7, and your courage was your willpower, basically. And how it worked was, if you broke against your hierarchy of sin, if you sinned, then you rolled against your conscience, and if you succeeded, you felt bad. So that was why characters with a higher conscience had an easier time to not lose humanity, kind of, because they would feel worse for doing bad things. And that would
They realized that this is not how it's supposed to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the paths kind of work the same way. Some of them used conscience and instinct. Some of them used conviction and self-control. They all had different combinations of the first 2, because it was conscience and conviction. It was the same kind of thing. You had to cross out 1, and then you had self-control and instinct. And if you had an instinct character, for example, you were more in tune with your beasts. Self-control was keeping the beast down. Instinct was embracing the beast, or riding frenzy, for example. So paths would have these same hierarchies of sin, and if you broke against them, you had to roll, I think, your conviction, unless it was your conscience. A few paths had conscience. So they worked very similar in that regard. And that's why in D5, I think, is if you succeed your role, you feel bad. And feeling bad is being human. If you don't feel bad for killing someone, that's inhuman, you know.
And maybe your resolve is, I'm going to try not to do that. I don't want to be that person. You know, if you think about that, it makes
Exactly.
So I mentioned earlier, I kind of have like when I look at games, because I look at a lot of games and I read games, I play all kinds of games. One of the other litmus tests that I look at is like, if I enjoy a game or if I'm going to play it, is like if it captures like a theme. Like, I don't typically like systems that try to be everything. Like, I've never liked GURPS. I mean, no offense to anyone who likes GURPS, GURPS strives to be everything, and in being everything, GURPS is not like great at anything. It's good at lots of things, but like it's not it doesn't excel at anything. I like that V5 specifically focuses on like the street level,
Yeah.
new vampires, you know, and tries to incorporate features that capture that theme and make it good. But I understand that like a lot of people who played older versions like to play elders, you know what I mean, and you
Yeah.
can't get that in
No.
V5, you know what I mean.
No, exactly. And there were very little rules for playing elders initially in Vampire the Masquerade earlier editions as well, but there were splat books basically released specifically for how to play elders. So I'm expecting there to be something like that further down the line as well. I mean, eventually people will want to play elders. I ran into the problem running Helena, for example, during Chicago Stories, my Chicago by Night Chronicle, that Helena has 5 dots in her disciplines, right? So the problem is if you have 5 dots in your disciplines, I think this is something we're going to get to later, you still don't have access to all the different ones, from what I gather. You have 5 different ones.
Yeah, you have 5 along the path to the end.
So that's something I'm expecting that would be expanded upon with a book released to cover elder rules, for example. Maybe
with SPCs, it seems like you could kind of like Schrodinger's cat. Your disciplines though, and then like not decide which one they had until you need one. And you know, when you open the box, now you know it's it's number 2.
That's freedom too. That's freedom too, because obviously Helena would have access to everything in Presence, so I don't even need to think about it. But for player characters, if you played for a really long time, it's kind of lackluster. We'll get into the experience and the disciplines in a little bit. I feel like we spent like half an hour just talking combat. But yeah, I really miss virtues, and even more I miss nature demeanor, because they were such fundamental guidelines for how to play your character. And I think that tenets and convictions put a lot of onus on the player themselves in kind of thinking these things up. One of the biggest problems I've had with my players is that they've been like, I can't think of good convictions. So maybe a bigger list of convictions and tenets would be welcome for V5, I think.
I always feel like I always end up going back to like when thinking about it, like religion, you know what I mean? Because that's a powerful conviction.
Yeah, exactly.
And older vampires would probably been religious in their life, you know what I mean? But again, it's tough. It's that some of the convictions for younger vampires are tough because convictions aren't super on the modern spectrum.
No.
You know?
Exactly. I was thinking too, like, how many people walk through their lives having these strong convictions? Like, I think a lot of people have some basic moral problems with stuff, but a lot of time you don't think about, like, what am I actually okay with doing? Some people reflect on it. A lot of people probably never do. So it's a little bit gamey to me. Nature and demeanor always felt like just this, oh yeah, you're a bravo. You want to show off. We all know a bravo. Like, we all know a hedonist or a curmudgeon, or we all know a loner. Like, they were they were called archetypes, very fundamentally defining to a character, which of course could have had other problems. It locked you into a certain kind of play style, but you know, it's different. But backgrounds, that's actually something I got into a lot of arguments where I was proven wrong on Reddit, because I am a huge background merit and flaws fanboy. I love those things in earlier editions. I still do. Not quite as many in V5 though.
You're short in supply. Actually, we had a I don't know if you remember, we had a conversation on Twitter after you did your character creation live stream.
Yeah, I remember. But fill our audience in, because I think you have a lot of good points. You had a lot of good points in that.
I think you were frustrated because you felt like you didn't get a lot of points. But like when you're actually making the character, just to catch everyone up on what I'm talking about, is that you get coterie points.
Yeah.
You get extra stuff from your predator. And you get the XP. Depending on like what generation you're playing as, which I think the game limits you to about 8. It at least only suggests XP for up to 8th generation. I think it was or was it 10th and 11th? I'm not sure. I forget. But if all that considered, you end up with a bunch. Where I usually almost am not sure where to. I'm like, oh god, I've got 2 more points.
Yeah.
I guess I'm gonna. Where's the lore sheets? You know what I mean?
Yeah. The lore sheets. I feel like the lore sheets. I think that's the crux of it, because I think we were also talking. I was making a character in my character creation who's been a vampire for less than 15 years. That means 0 XP. Older system would allow you freebies. You actually had more freebies as a mortal with the old system than you did as a vampire, to compensate for the fact that you had lower starting stats. In V5, you have lower starting stats. I don't know about the amount of skill points you have, but you also don't get any freebies or experience points if you're less than 15-year-old as a vampire. And I think that's really where I was like, that's really not incentivizing me to play a recently embraced vampire unless I would just want to fudge it. You'd be like, I get 15 XP anyway. But rules as written, that's really punishing if you have new players, for example, and the reason I think it's punishing is because the lore sheets are really interesting to kind of build your character around, just picking one, because you're only allowed one, and really integrating that. I wanted to make my character be running an asylum for Therese and Jeanette. That was 4 points out of 7. So it's like, she won't have any money. She won't have any allies, no contacts. She's not it felt so limiting to me. I actually got genuinely upset during that stream.
The trick to that is to, if you're going to be really young vampires, don't purchase your own haven, because you're young. Share a haven. You know what I mean? Pool, because everybody can give you get as rules is written, you get a dot for every person in the coterie for your coterie points. So that could be, if there's 4 people, that's 4 free dots right there. But everyone could put a dot into the coterie pool and then buy a really nice haven with like a prison and a gifted mortal bartender and bodyguard.
You got starting points in the coterie pool as well, right? Depending on how many players you are.
Yeah, 1 per player.
Yeah.
And then I think there's actually some other ones you get.
Yeah.
But then you can always throw more points in. Everyone can contribute points. Yeah. And if everyone pools, you can have a really nice haven that you share, but it's not specific to your character. Yeah. But if you're an older vampire, you could buy your own haven.
It's true. I think mostly I was hung up about the because if they want you to play a younger vampire, like you have Annabelle, for example, in LA by Night, like, she's obviously not going to be on par with Victor, who's not that much older as a vampire than she is if you look at it rules-wise, unless Jason decided to be like, you also get XP, which I could imagine him doing. They've been doing some house rulings there, I think. But I also, like, in Revised, and I think they started doing the Merits and Flaws in 2nd edition. I recall Merits and Flaws were not available in Werewolf the Apocalypse 2nd edition, but were in Revised. So I think Merits and Flaws became a thing in Revised and in V20. I both hate and love them, because there's so many Merits and Flaws that you go like, I'm going to pick this one. Nearsighted, -1, which means that I need glasses. So that's 1 freebie point.
Where's my glasses?
Yeah, that's 1 freebie point. Like, when is your storyteller gonna go like, oh yeah, and your glasses break? Like,
they've done with it.
It puts an onus on the storyteller to keep track of all the different merits and flaws, because you're allowed to have 7 points of flaws, which meant that you could potentially have a lot of merits. I don't think there was an upper limit on merits, and there were a lot of merits. So, I mean, I can understand why they boiled it down, but I think it just, putting them all together with the not so good editing of the 5th edition book just made it a bit of a clusterfuck, I guess.
One thing I wished when I first read it is that you could do a negative point for positive point buy, but I think they didn't put that for like fear of like encouraging min-maxing. Yeah. You know what I mean? Where like, you're like a crippled, blind, you know what I mean, like hated vampire who has a mansion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that was a huge issue in my old group when I was playing. I was like, okay, for the longest time we didn't even know there was a limit on how many flaws you could make. So one player was, okay, I need to get 20 points of flaws for my character. Like that actually happened. So I can really see why they were like, maybe we need to cut back on these a little bit. But not this much. V5 is so limited. I want more flaws and merits.
Lore sheets, though. Lore
Yeah, that's
sheets
true.
are amazing. They're one of my
They are.
favorite things about V5.
Absolutely.
I barely buy regular merits anymore. Like resources, I can spend XP on resources in game. I'll buy a business in game, but like over here, you know what I mean? Oh, I'm the grandchilder of hard stat. Absolutely, I can't buy that later.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's true. I agree with you. Lore sheets is probably the thing I love the most about V5. It's such a brilliant way because the meta lore was always kind of hovering around the characters, but it was up to the storyteller to kind of weave it into it. But this is just, here's all the meta plots. You're given an into it. Work with it, which I think really brings it back to life.
Big ends.
Yeah.
Big ends. Like in my game, I came in late, right?
Yeah.
But because of the lore sheet that I purchased, I don't want to say what it is because I think some of the players I'm playing with are in the game and they have no idea. But one of the lore sheets I purchased from colored my entire character's motivation and entire reason for entering the city that I'm in and joining their coterie and the mission that he's on all came just from a lore sheet purchase, and it became the entire premise of the character and why he exists. And it's been an amazing role-playing opportunity just from one purchase.
Yeah.
They're really I was like, that looks cool.
And they've gotten even better over time. Like the initial lore sheets, there were some really good ones. Calls of the Blood Gods, I love them all. Like Chicago by Night, great lore sheets. We're getting someone saying in the chat that you have to use XP to buy a lore sheet. I think you can also use your merit points, right?
You can use any dots, as far as I understand. That's what we're doing.
I was under the assumption that you could use your merit points to also buy lore sheets.
Yeah,
which is actually why
I think that's why the generic merits are so limited, because there's just this huge wealth of lore sheets at this point.
Yeah, and not to forget that all different levels of lore sheets have a mechanical advantage, or most of them have a mechanical advantage. So that is a merit. You just, because there's so much flavor text, you go like, all right, but what's the advantage? But there are often system advantages, like once per session you're able to do this, or maybe this will give you a Malwa or something like that.
Or once per forever, you get to like call your Ravnos buddy, and he does some kind of super illusion for you. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And speaking of Ravnos, what a segue into the next point: the availability of clans. I think by far this is the biggest complaint I've seen with V5. I don't agree with it. You can hate me as much as you want, folks. I don't agree.
Oh, I was about to say, I don't hate you for that.
but I do agree that it's a problem that you had to get the Camarilla book to get the Ministry, and that you had to get the Anarch books to... No, Anarch books to get the Ministry and...
Ministry, yeah.
Banu Hakim in the Camarilla.
Banu Hakim, yeah.
I think that was not good, but... I bought them in the same pack, so, I got the books together. But I think...
I also have all three.
I think a big reason for this, because all the 13 clans were available in Revised, so it's not even a V20 thing. It was available in Revised. Second edition had all 7 clans to the Camarilla, and then released... I think second edition also had the other... I don't recall. But in Revised, you had all 13 clans. Sabbat, Camarilla, Independent. So I agree... in the sense that, it's really limiting you. But I think considering the many changes they're making to Vampire, and the fact that there's so much in V5 that is V1 in a new packaging, because V5 is very much going back to first edition of Vampire, where there were very limited available options for a player. So I feel like I'd rather have these clans being parsed out, but well thought out, like the Hekata. I like the changes with the Hekata and the La Sombra, then you just have everyone in the same book and be like, all right, here's one page describing them. Have fun. There will be a clan book sometime. I mean, even Lore of the Clans in V20 was severely limited compared to the clan books in Revised, for example, in page amount.
I think that's going to be the player guide.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
That they promised. I'm pretty sure they're going to pull all the clans that have been released so far into one player guide book, which will be nice.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm seeing here, I think Helton here was saying that I don't like the clans being sold into city books, but looking at how slowly the books are coming out, I'm okay with it. I agree. If we were looking at a Dungeons & Dragons release schedule, I would be iffy about like 1 or 2 books a year. But as rare as they're coming out now, you know, I'm okay. House ruling is the thing. Yeah, sorry.
I think they're worried about not having mechanical value in these supplemental books. Like Anarch and Camarilla both add no mechanical value outside of their lore sheets and the clan that they add.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's kind of jarring, but I still loved those books because as someone who's kind of new to Vampire the Masquerade, a year, you know, like those were invaluable to be able to see. Like, because I was like, when I first started, I was like trying to plan being a storyteller, and I was like, what does a Primogen council do? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You know, the Camarilla book's great for that. You know,
I agree with you. They're amazing for lore, but I think it is a little bit disingenuous to be like, all right, here's all the fluff. You barely get any of it in the core rule book. Just make it 2 books instead of 3. I think a lot of people were like, because I don't think it was super obvious either when it was marketed. Like, I didn't buy the books when they initially came out. I was kind of late to the V5 train, but I can imagine people were like, I'll buy the Camarilla or Anarch book later. I want to get the core rule book, and getting it and be like, I'm missing a bunch of stuff in this book. Could have maybe made the core rule book thicker. I don't know. But yeah, sorry.
Oh, what I was just gonna say, going back to the original point about like the limited number of clans, I think the reason they did that, and going back to Revised, I played Revised. I believe it was Revised ages ago, because I remember there only being the original 13 clans in the book, so it probably wasn't 20th. Is that, like to put it in an anecdote, like a true Bruja, Tamichi, and Salubri walk into a bar, like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
When everyone's special, but the original 13, no one's special, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's like one of those things. Like, why would you ever play the 13 original if you could only do something if you played some? Like, you still got your celerity in, you know what I mean? Like, in the thing, but then you also got Ravnos's illusion magic.
I feel like V20 even more than Revised is the criminal in this case, because V20, some background information about V20, by the way, when it was released, White Wolf was well on its way of collapsing. CCP wasn't really doing much with the IP, and V20 was released as a
goodbye.
Yes, as a goodbye. It was a goodbye. It was a 20 years anniversary. It's like, hey everyone, thank you for sticking by with us. Here's everything we've done in one book. They cut out so much of the lore, obviously, because they couldn't faff about in this book, but they have all the bloodlines, all the disciplines, all the clans. It's all in one book, and that was fine because it was a compendium of the greatness of Vampire over 20 years. But then it kind of became the new core rulebook, and it created this comfort. Like, everything I could ever possibly need is available in this book. And here's even more source books being released with even more cool disciplines and spells. And then you go to V5 and you're like, this is less than a quarter of what I had in the core rulebook of V20. What's going on? So I think V20 kind of set people up to be disappointed in V5 if that was the book they started with, and I know plenty of people started with V20.
And a lot of those extra clans, they were trying to sell splat books. You know what I mean? Like, when before V20, like in Revised, when they were releasing like extra clans and stuff. So they were doing like special. They were like, how do we sell a splat book? Like we'll put a new
Yeah.
discipline. You know what I mean? And then it just bloated and bloated. I've read the history about this, and I've heard the debates on both sides. I like what they did with V5. I feel like it's if you look at Chicago by Night, which is the model, like the only model we have right now of like a V5 city,
Yeah.
the elders have so many discipline points.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
They've
got like
as well,
6 at 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so like
and blood
they could
potency
do everything
up there with Zoo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just a matter of like because it gets muddled, right? Some people are very against the changes to the system. Some people are very against the changes to the lore, and it's not always obvious what people like or don't like. And a lot of the times, people would just go back to V20 then if you're not happy with it. And I can see both sides of it. Like I can definitely see that this is if you wanted to carry your character over into V5, that's not gonna happen in a couple of years because those rules are not going to be available. But it's a different take. It's a new system that's been built from the ground up to be like, hey, let's reinvent vampire, but also keep all the good stuff that we liked, sort of. And yeah, I have my opinions on that as well, but it's.
I feel like we kind of segued into disciplines.
Oh yeah, we did.
we straddled 2 talking points there.
Yeah. I agree that there are not enough disciplines for neither the ministry nor the Banu Hakim. I'm just gonna go outright and say it. One amalgam for the ministry.
I would like more amalgams.
Yeah.
I feel like if they do that player's guide, I hope they add some more amalgams.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like
they have to.
It's like an appendix.
Yeah.
Because they're gonna go back and I hope. Because this is a guide I'm supposed to give to players to make a character. I'm hoping that they'll go back in and retool some of the disciplines just a little bit. Maybe just add a couple more amalgams. I'm hoping. I can hope. Because the amalgams are great. Like the La Sombra amalgam, the Arms of Ankarum or whatever.
I love it.
My favorite discipline is a La Sombra. You can't beat that.
Yeah, shadow
and the Malkavian one with messing with their mind.
Yeah, demontation.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And that's you just mentioned. I think one of the sore spots, like demontation, was its own discipline. Again, some history. A lot of these disciplines, demontation, quietus, Serpentis, I think. Oh God, I'm not good at disciplines. They were actually.
I thought it was Quietus.
Quietus.
I could be wrong about
Quietus is the Banu Hakim one, and Serpentis. Let's call it Serpentis because I have bad memory. They were actually created. I think they were 3rd edition rules because in 2nd edition a lot of these rules at least did not exist. And they were created. A lot of them were also created along with the Sabbat. But I can kind of see how some of the Serpentis discipline points were not super great. They were kind of just repackaging of Protean disciplines. That doesn't mean you should cut it out, though. You can make better stuff with it. But I feel for people who love Malkavians. I feel for people who love the Banu Hakim or the Ministry. And for God's sake, I feel for people who love Tremere. I love Tremere. They really cut it off at the ankles. But at least for Blood Medic, that was because of the power creep. There was just so much thaumaturgy out there.
There's a moment in LA by Night. I don't want to spoil anything. When Eva uses a particular power that's electricity based, when that happened, I paused the thing. I was like, what is that? That is not in the book. And like I read the book and I was like, I rewound it like 3 times to hear what he said. And I Googled it and I was like, oh, this is you know what I mean? This is from V20. I was so confused by that. I was like, where is that?
Yeah.
Where is that power?
There was so many discipline dots over the years. Like you wouldn't believe it. And every time they release a new book, like a chronicle book or whatever, they're like, let's put in a new discipline in it that this bad guy is going to use. And inevitably it would be used by players, stuff like that. So it was a hard call to make, I'm sure. But we need more disciplines. There's no going around it. We really do.
Well, I can say as a point of suggestion, and like this is what I do is resources, right? If you look at the old disciplines, because I've looked at like the V20 disciplines, where they go up to like
Yeah, yeah.
15 dots. After 10 dots, they become plot devices, right?
Yes,
Like
yes, absolutely.
there's nothing that says that at your table when you have an elder that you can't just plot device in some powers,
Yeah.
right? Like if you want your Methuselah to have that discipline that lets them have dominate, where they can dominate power on any of their children, that's just a plot device,
Yeah.
right? Like players can't access that, but there's no reason that you can't just have that happen.
I think,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
you know what I mean?
As long as you have the kind of table where the players are
It should be a
comfortable.
plot
Yeah,
device,
yeah,
though.
where
It,
players are
it,
comfortable with the storyteller doing that, then absolutely, I agree with you.
I mean, that could be the hook for a whole coteries adventure. And I think that's what those were intended for, is to be
Yeah,
more
yeah,
hooks. Like, wait, what? There's one that's like a whole city has nightmares, or like the 15 dot, the whole
yeah,
world
yeah,
shares a nightmare. You know what I
yeah, yeah.
mean? I think can't remember which discipline that was, but that's kind of a cool plot device.
Wait,
Like
what was it? Is it chemistry? Is that the one, the Ravnos?
I can't remember, but I remember like reading that, being like, what a cool plot device. Imagine the news reports of, you know what I mean, of
Yeah, yeah.
people speculating about this shared nightmare, because people would
Yeah,
realize
that was
it.
probably
You know what I mean?
that's dementation. I think
Yeah, it probably
dementation
is demonstration.
has some pretty amazing abilities. Or it was chemistry. Okay.
But there's no reason you
Chemistry,
couldn't
yeah,
slip those plot devices in
absolutely,
as the hooks for your, for
absolutely,
lack of a better word,
yeah,
adventures,
yeah,
and in the night. Um, I don't know if I would use them like as powers against the players in a combat, right?
yeah.
That'd be kind of,
I
that's kind
think,
of dark. But
yeah, I think it's just I think again, V5 also had it rough because it had V20 to compete with, and it had to stand out in some way. And I think also I've heard words that it was rushed in development in some parts
I could see that.
to hit Gen Con. So a whole lot of content was probably cut, meaning that some parts would be sacrificed possibly for later releases and stuff like that. But again, man, I was making my ministry member. I was like, there's one thing that I get unique for being an entirely different clad. That really struck a chord with me of being very unfair. And same with dementation for Malkavians. It's like, it's one thing. That's all they get. But
I wish there was more of those.
yeah, Player's
We're
Handbook.
100%
Can't wait
on
for
the
it.
same page.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm hoping, if you're listening.
yeah. It's a lot. But what else were we going to talk about? I think we've hit on pretty much all the points that we were thinking of discussing. Do we have any? You were mentioning talking about the simple antagonist system. Is that something you wanted to bring up?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I could just kind of use that as a way to, because we never really talked about like one roll combat and like 3-round conflict.
Yeah.
Like I've gone back to it a few times, like my litmus test for if I like a game.
Mm-hmm.
Pacing control is one of those. And
Yeah.
V5 nails pacing control better than any game I've ever run before. It being able to just be like, okay, look, you don't have to turn by turn fight that security guard to to get past him, or if you want to talk your way past him, we don't need to do a whole social conflict. You know what I mean? Like, let's just throw one dice. If there's damage involved, there's a system to simulate it. And the simple antagonist goes kind of along with that, is that you can just throw some dots with a name and roll, and the game just lets you go. Like, like everyone's heard that that old saying, like in Dungeons and Dragons, never split the party.
Mm-hmm.
Never split the party. And in Dungeons and Dragons, that's because like combat's like an hour to 2 hour thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you split the party, 3 people are sitting off by themselves while you like roll attack and attack and attack. Like here you can have someone go off on their own.
Yeah.
They can go to hack the fuse box while you go up the elevator. And if that happens, you can just throw one dice or do 3 rounds you know,
Yeah, for sure.
and that's official. That's official. Like that's that's a good design decision.
Yeah.
I I wouldn't have loved V5 if it didn't have that. You know.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of never rolling for stuff unless it is something where both results, a victory and a failure, would result in something narratively interesting.
Yeah.
If my players have to run through a corridor of mooks, sorry, to get to where they're going, I'm like, that's just that's yeah, I've done that in Dungeons and Dragons because I'm like, oh shit, I don't know what to do now. We have 40 minutes left at the game. I'm gonna give them like a quick fight to end on a high note. Uh, but like, if your character is super great at something, then they're gonna kill a lot of people. If they're a good fighter, it would be natural that you wouldn't even need to roll for certain encounters, right? You'd be like,
Yeah.
all right, but you're fighting against this awesome martial artist right now, and that might be worthy of a roll. Or let's say that you are sneaking down a corridor. If I want my player if I want my player to roll for that, that's because I want it to either I have two branches in my mind, and both will be interesting for me and for the players. If I just want to go, I want to punish my players. I feel like that's a huge mistake because that's just gonna have them try different ways of solving the same thing. That's not failing forward as it's called, I think.
And people always forget too, and I'm guilty of forgetting this as well. I because I don't think it's for most people, but they do have that little page like right in the middle of the book where they tell you how to play the game with no dice.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And they give
Yeah.
you advice on how to do hunger with no dice. So if you're just out with your I was never a theater kid, but if you're just in high school and you're out with your theater friends and you just have the book or something and you don't have any dice, like, and you guys just want to role play out some Vampire the Masquerade, the game supports that
Yeah.
on paper.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's you don't have to roll any dice at all for this game. And you know, that's in the spirit of, you know, what was it, the famous Gygax quote, like the secret we hope players never realize is they don't need any rules.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
Like,
and it is true. I would consider any role playing group where the group just collectively goes, we're fine with whatever's gonna happen. When you're okay with losing, that's when you've achieved that level of we don't actually need rules. We're creating a story together. We're not playing a game. Although that being said, playing a game is also fun. Like you could definitely make it more of a competitive thing. But I agree with you that having the option of playing this game more as a performance, as an improvisational theater thing, that's definitely very appealing to me. And I feel that this it's clear that some of the developers are from the LARP scene. When you read the book, I know a few people, in fact, were, because the LARP I took part in some vampire LARPs. I'm not super into it, but it's always a lot more fluent. Uh,
I believe Dawkins is Matthew Dawkins is quoted is had a
I think
big
so.
role in the core book. I want to say that he's credited. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, he
I
is.
know
He
that
is.
I know that he's been big into LARPing in the past.
Yeah.
So I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised if a
Yeah.
lot of the people who
Yeah.
have been major writers have been into LARP.
I think yeah, definitely. But the thing also with having rule-less games is that it also takes away like you can't have that kind of game and have players still expecting the storyteller to deliver everything, because the less rules you have, the more the storyteller is a player, and you kind of have to have this collaborative thing. Like I think a lot of people should invite themselves to tell the story with the storyteller. And
Oh,
sorry,
absolutely.
yeah, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but like Apocalypse World, for example, promotes the players creating NPCs, promotes the players presenting like reasons for. Like for example, I'm asking you, all right, so you're heading towards this old factory area in this post-apocalyptic world, and you all got your weapons. Why are you going there? Instead of me saying, oh, these people took your doodad, and you're going there to get it. Having the players come up with reasoning, having the players come up with NPCs takes a huge load off the storyteller, and I honestly think it makes the game much better. And one of the steps to doing that is removing the amount of rules involved. Sorry.
Like I consider myself a storyteller and a game master first and a player second because I've spent most of my time playing RPGs as a game master. Um, But so like in my current game where I thankfully get to play as a player, which is amazing, I find myself like going to my storyteller sometimes and telling him like what I want out of the game. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I had this sire character on my character sheet. I would love to explore like themes of like animosity. Like because a lot of players at my table, like they have like a great relationship with their sire. They're like their best friend. I was like, I like the idea of my character being afraid of their sire. I can
Yeah.
somewhere down the line, in however way works best for your story, can we work that in as my sire coming in as an intimidating character, and then maybe the that could encourage the players to maybe help my character through that. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
I'll tell them like my expectations, like things I want to incorporate into the character, and that can kind of help him guide the game, you know what I mean, and give me the things that I want. I think
Yeah.
players should do that more instead of just being a passenger. Like I wish sometimes that when I was storytelling and game mastering that my players would come and tell me what they want, so I can give them,
Yeah.
like what they want. Maybe not exactly, but the themes and the vibe and the feeling, communicate,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Communication is always the key for any successful group of players. But I think we've been covering most of the ground here. One consistently occurring complaint about the V5 edition that I was seeing a lot is that the editing is a little bit all over the place, mildly speaking. I know I personally find it difficult to find certain rules because they're spread out really wide. And I think, for example, the rules about your blood potency is really far away from any part of the book that for character creation. I've always felt that table of blood potency should have been with the character creation, for example. Disciplines being a certain area, that's fine, but like core rules to playing your character should all be kind of in the same place. And I also feel like in V5 there's not a lot of tools for creating your own chronicle, creating your own city, that kind of rule. Stuff like that used to be. There was a little bit of that in the previous editions rule books, but they also released like the Storyteller's Handbook, stuff like that, which I haven't heard any news about. But those books really fleshed out the city creation aspect, and I feel like the core rule book of V5 really misses on a lot of storyteller help. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is your experience the same?
It is. So when I first read the book, I tried to read it from the perspective of someone who's like making a chronicle. Unfortunately, that first one fell apart. But I did get to think a lot about, because I fully fleshed out a city, made a whole relationship map. The one things that like really intimidated me, there is a simple antagonist system, right? But there's no guidance on like how to make a vampire in your city.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you shouldn't make it like a player because the players' rules are very specifically for the players.
Yeah.
But there's no guidance. Like if you think
Exactly.
you should have 5 dots, you should have 5 dots. Yeah. I ended up making the only, I'm going to plug myself here a little bit, the only kindred online generator that exists for V5. It generates stat blocks, like a little flavor text thing with descriptions, and it picks disciplines for you so that you can, if you just want to be inspired and make something that's not stereotypical, like maybe it's a Malkavian who is depressed, right? It might just generate Malkavian with mild depression. Why couldn't a Malkavian just be mildly depressed? But sure. But there's not tools like that by default. That's kind of the whole reason I made my channel, is because they don't equip you very good. That's one of my biggest complaints with V5 is they don't equip you very well for making a city. Thankfully, there's people like Salubricat, right? Who are, he hasn't made a whole lot of episodes for his Chronicle Doctor, but there's, he is great. In fact, was part of the inspiration for my YouTube channel. And I was like, you know what? I've got all these tools that I've collecting and scouring the internet for and trying to bring all together so I can use. Like other people would like those things too.
Yeah.
But I wish there was more guidance.
Yeah, there.
I just a little.
Yeah, I looked at it. I looked at the city creation rules now in the V5 core book, and it has some stuff on like stuff that can happen. Some general guidelines on like, in an anarch city, the commune rules that the old abandoned amusement park is off limits to all kindred. Why? So it has these snippets of like, you could look at this, like use these things from the city. But I don't think there are any hard rules like the ones you mentioned. Like, how would you create the Primogen? Like, how would you distribute power in the city? Um, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of people I talk to mention Chicago by Night as being a hugely useful tool in planning their city, because you can model your city off of how Chicago is structured. And I think that
Yeah.
speaks a little bit to the fact that the rules in the core rulebook is light. They go a lot for feeling. They give you a lot of advice for how to convey a city's life to random events that can happen. But I feel like the crunch of it is not there in the core rulebook. And I guess I feel a little bit about that in general about V5, that the crunch is a little lacking. I would have never thought I would say that because I'm not a crunch kind of guy. But when you're sitting down and you want to go like, all right, how do I structure my city? There's not a lot of concrete stuff to do that with, unless you get like Chicago by Night and go like, all right, so this is how they do their city.
Those are the only data points we have.
Yeah.
Chicago's by Night's Vampires, about like what an elder looks like in V5. You know what I mean? Like those are the only data points. In fact, when it came out, I thankfully I can't think of the user who did it, made a spreadsheet, and you know what I mean, like just showed this age, this generation, this many disciplines, and I took that and I worked that into my vampire generator. But before that, before Chicago by Night came out, I was just rolling a die.
Yeah.
I was just like, I don't know, they should have 5 disciplines.
Yeah, like it's hard to figure out, and I really hope. I mean, the player's handbook is probably not going to have stuff like that, but Storyteller's handbook, I hope, is in the works, or soon to be in the works anyway. Because I feel like maybe it's hard. I don't have the release schedule of previous editions in my head, but I think like a book for like Cults of the Blood Gods, which I absolutely love. I'm seeing some talk about that in chat, by the way. You can still be a rotten corpse as a Samedi. You just need to buy the. You can first of all be that, but you can also get the lore sheet that makes you a Samedi. But Hikata, I mean, sorry, the Calls of the Blood Gods is a very specific kind of book. Like, it's still very broad in that sense that it covers a lot of ground, but it's still about something very specific. Like, you would get books like Chaining the Beast, I believe it's called, like, oh god, I have them on the other side of my bookcase. I can't look at them now, but there were very specific source books released later into the revised edition that were very about specific topics: Gilded Cage, Council of Primogen, stuff like that. But the meat
and there like a whole there was a whole book from Revised about rules, right?
Yeah. There's books about everything from Revised. They like you were mentioning before, they were chugging them out to keep making money, because role playing games were kind of going out of style for a little bit, at least in the way they were done, and it was getting more expensive to publish them. But a book like Calls of the Blood Gods, I would have imagined would come later in the production process, and maybe more crunch books would have come earlier. I don't know. I can't read the minds of the people publishing these books, but like we've been talking about, their rule clarification, expansion on disciplines, creating NPCs, stuff like that. But it is difficult for a new storyteller, I think, to run a game if V5 is their first edition of the game. And
I think that's why channels like ours are like seeing traffic. You know what I mean? I think I've got 50 subscribers on my YouTube channel, and I usually pull like 2 to like 500 views per video. Like, people are searching for help. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they're looking for help. And I think we'll get there. Hopefully, I have faith. That where V5 is going.
Yeah, same here. I mean, they're chugging out stuff. I've loved the games so far that they've released as well. I'm looking forward to Shadows of New York, for example. But I can definitely see that people have a beef with V5, especially people who expected an evolution of V20 and just got this new take on the system as well. I think we need to round up soon, but I think we've covered most of the grounds of the changes in the game. Um, Overall, I feel like I was just gonna say that I feel like the earlier editions handled role playing tools better, but then I remember that I think that predator type, that your tenets and your convictions help you with that as well, but from a different perspective. It's a different game, I guess, is what I want to take from it.
Yeah, I would.
For
From
good
what
or
I've seen,
bad.
it seems
Yeah.
like a pretty vastly different
Yeah.
game.
For good and bad, it's a different game. I V20 is still playable, still plenty of stuff out there. There's ways you can incorporate the meta plot changes from V5 into your own, but I don't think there's going to be many more V20 books being made. I recall the Onyx Path didn't list that as a game they're working on when they're looking for freelancers, for example. So I think V20, unfortunately, is not going to get any more stuff, rules-wise at least, unless you're Storyteller's Vault, for example.
On the bright side, though, Hunter's Entertainment making Werewolf. Like,
It's true.
I know those guys. I used to be like a fixture in their community, like when they were just starting out with Outbreak Undead.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys are amazing. They're at Hunter. I love them. I actually messaged Ivan Van Norman like
Yeah.
when I saw that they had it. I was like, I don't know if you remember me, man, but like, congratulations on the contract. He was like, of course I remember you.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Like, ah!
yeah. I am so looking forward to the new Werewolf game as well. I'm happy they got the job. The thing they released recently, where you got to meet all the writers on it. Did you see the video?
I didn't watch the video, but I it's one of those. It's like I just haven't been. I've been busy at working on it, but I have such a backlog of videos to watch.
It's a good video because they're just introducing the writers for Werewolf 5th edition, and they talk about their own experiences.
I know
and
B.
thoughts.
Dave Walters.
Yeah,
is
he's working on it,
right?
Yeah, he's working on it, and he's got werewolves aplenty in his Valley, Dark Valley. Is that what it's called? Shadow
He's
of the
the
Valley.
Hunter's Entertainment book guy, but is Chris Chris Almere, is he working on it?
Not sure.
I don't know if
not sure.
But he was like one of the the founder like writers for like Hunter's Entertainment when they started out.
Cool. I know Matthew Dawkins is involved, but when is he not involved? In World of Darkness.
I might be biased about the Werewolf though, because like I am credited in like some of the early books
really?
for Hunters.
That's
yeah,
cool.
I was an early tester for some of the supplements they did for Outbreak Undead. I'm not gonna say which ones because it's my real name in there.
We'll keep it a secret for now. People can go scouring if they want. But we got to round up because it's half an hour longer than I said it would be, and I got places to be, and I'm sure you got places to be too. But this was an absolute blast. Thank you so much for helping me out with this, because you straightened out a lot of question marks, turned them into exclamation points for me, and I'm so happy you were here. So you want to promo your stuff before we say bye to the chat?
Yeah, LLADonZombie. I'm on YouTube. I do streams with my wife and sometimes my son. I've got a 4-year-old. We play video games on Twitch.
Cool.
And I do the 3 Dots and Resources on YouTube, where we talk about tools, resources, stuff to help make running games easier. Primogen, thank you so much for having me on. I hope we could do something like this again in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
I had so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep it in mind. This is the first time we're doing this Council Matters, but I'm trying out new stuff all the time. There is, I might as well reveal it here, there is a little Giovanni Chronicles video coming soon. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but if you that was released by Black Dog Publishing, if you've ever heard of that company.
I heard the reputation.
Yeah. Yeah. But there are some kernels of gold in the otherwise.
I think the first time I heard the name was on The Beckoning.
Yeah, Black Dog was Black Dog, also famous for releasing the only pornographic novel, I think.
Yeah, that's what you guys had talked about on The Beckoning.
Yeah, they got a reputation. They're the same company. They just want to release stuff under a different brand. But keep your eyes on that. And again, thank you so much for coming. If you want to check out Zombie's work, there are links in the description of the video. And I think all the way down there, we got your username and the platforms you're most commonly found on. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for standing by, and I hope we answered some of your questions, everyone. We don't have any control over V5. Like, believe me, I want to know what's going on with the Tzimitzi. We'll just have to wait and see. Until next time, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Zombie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.